You know, when someone says something so smug, so dripping in privilege that the room just stops? That's exactly what happened the moment Derek Ashton opened his mouth in Judge Frank Caprio's courtroom and said, "Sue me, I'm rich." You could feel the air change, even the bailiff shifted. The quote echoed off the wood-paneled walls like it was auditioning for the title of most entitled sentence of the decade. And Derek, he leaned back in his seat like he
If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment. Your feedback helps shape what we cover next, and you being here keeps the conversation going. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.
just dropped some sort of mic, but what he didn't realize, he had just lit the fuse on the courtroom equivalent of a stick of dynamite. Let's rewind, because the lead-up to that moment was as jaw-dropping as the fallout. Derek Ashton, 27 years old, heir to a multi-million-dollar real estate empire, the kind of guy who probably thinks tipping is optional and valet is a right, not a luxury, had a meltdown. A bakery, Bella's Bakery to be specific, ran out of his favorite almond croissant. And instead of taking it like a normal adult or even a semi-decent toddler, Derek exploded. He stormed out in a rage and returned under the cover of darkness with a golf club, because apparently nothing screams revenge like smashing a window with a 9-iron. He spray-painted Trash Bakery across the brick front like it was a frat prank gone psychotic. Total damage, $4,500. Emotional damage, immeasurable. But the real gut punch came later in that courtroom. Antonio Rixai, the bakery's owner, stood there, a widower, an immigrant, a man who built his shop from nothing with his late wife, describing what it felt like to walk into his life's work shattered and tagged with insult. This wasn't just vandalism, it was erasure. It was someone saying, "You don't matter." And Derek sat there unfazed, until Judge Caprio asked him if he had anything to say. That's when he delivered it, that line. "Sue me, I'm rich." Now, if you know Judge Caprio, you know he's a man of grace, of humor. He's given second chances to everyone from teenage speeders to grandmas with expired meters. But the second Derek said that, his expression changed, and you just knew, oh, this guy picked the wrong judge on the wrong day. What happened next wasn't just surprising, it was historic. Caprio did something no one in that courtroom had ever seen before. In the middle of the criminal proceeding, he paused everything, looked Antonio in the eye and asked, "Would you like to sue him?" Just like that. Antonio was speechless. Civil lawsuits are separate, complicated, expensive, but Caprio had already turned to the court clerk and said, "Get Rhode Island Legal Services on the line." Within minutes, Antonio had pro bono legal representation.
If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment. Your feedback helps shape what we cover next, and you being here keeps the conversation going. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.
Right there in real time, in front of Derek Ashton, whose face had now gone from smug to stunned. The room buzzed, you could feel everyone silently cheering. This wasn't just a slap on the wrist. This was the system finally saying, your money doesn't make you untouchable. Derek got 90 days in jail. He was ordered to pay the full $4,500 in restitution, and he had to do community service at a food bank, no less. But that wasn't the end. Because the civil lawsuit, it was just getting started. Over the next 6 months, the case unfolded. Derek's lawyers tried to settle. Of course they did. Quietly, efficiently, expensively. But Antonio said no. He wanted this to play out in court, in public, for everyone to hear the details. And that jury, they didn't hold back. They awarded Antonio over $40,000 in damages. Why? Not just for the repairs, but for the insult, for the arrogance, for the sheer audacity of Derek's behavior, for saying, "Sue me, I'm rich," and expecting that to shut everything down. You could almost hear that gavel drop like thunder. But the best part, Antonio didn't keep the money for himself. He fixed the bakery, sure, replaced the windows, repainted the walls, even upgraded the kitchen. But then, he set up a scholarship, the Maria Rixey Fund, named after his late wife. Every year, it now helps young immigrants and aspiring bakers afford culinary school. The man who lost everything for a moment turned that moment into something generational. And what did Derek do? He disappeared. For a while, there were whispers. He tried to rebrand. There was talk of him attending some mindfulness retreat, some deeply humbling silent yoga experience in Costa Rica. A PR consultant probably begged him to apologize on camera. But you know what actually happened. One day he walked back into Bella's bakery. No press, no security, just him holding a pastry bag, inside an almond croissant. He placed it on the counter and said simply, "I'm sorry." No excuses, no spin, just that. And Antonio looked him in the eye, nodded and said, "This one's on the house." That's it, no big speech, no public posturing, just two men, one moment, and a quiet transaction that said more than any courtroom ruling ever could. Now look, this story could have ended so differently. Derek could have paid someone off. He could have walked away with a slap on the wrist and a smug grin, but for once, wealth didn't buy silence, it bought a spotlight, and when that spotlight hit, it showed the world exactly who he was and who he was. And Judge Caprio, he didn't just hand down a sentence, he handed down a message. That money does not mean immunity. That no one, no matter how rich or smug or disconnected, gets to vandalize someone's livelihood and walk away with a smirk. It was bold, it was unexpected, and it was necessary. Because justice, real justice, isn't just about laws, it's about balance, about looking someone like Antonio in the
If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment. Your feedback helps shape what we cover next, and you being here keeps the conversation going. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.
eye and saying, "You matter, what you built matters, and you don't have to fight this alone." And to everyone who's ever been told they don't have a chance against the wealthy, the powerful, the connected. Remember this story. Remember that sometimes the underdog does win. That sometimes a judge will go off script. That sometimes a smashed window becomes a symbol of something so much bigger: resilience, integrity, and the refusal to be bullied by a last name and a trust fund. If this story fired you up even half as much as it fired up that courtroom, do the thing, hit like, drop a comment, tell us your thoughts. What would you have said to Derek Ashton in that courtroom? And share this with someone who loves a good dose of justice served with a croissant. And of course, subscribe, because next time we're digging into a scandal involving influencers, fake charities, and a yacht that definitely shouldn't have been tax deductible. It's going to get delicious. You want to know the part that really stays with you? It's not the gavel slamming, not even the viral quote that turned Derek Ashton into the walking embodiment of every spoiled rich kid in every courtroom drama ever aired on cable. It's the silence, that silence right after Judge Caprio made his move. Because for a few seconds, the courtroom didn't breathe. Everyone had just witnessed something that wasn't supposed to happen. A judge, mid-sentencing, turning the system sideways to give a working-class bakery owner who'd been targeted for nothing more than doing his job the tools to fight back. And not in theory, not someday, right there. That kind of silence, it's not confusion, it's awe. You could see it in Derek's face, that perfect, stunned confusion of a man who'd spent his entire life thinking courtrooms were speed bumps, not consequences. He'd shown up expecting a fine, maybe a stern talking to, maybe some light probation. Instead, he got the full weight of accountability crashing down like a rack of sheet pans. Let's not pretend he wasn't coached. Derek had the kind of legal team that charges hourly rates starting with commas. You just know they told him, look polished, act remorseful, mention charity work, all the rich kids' survival tactics. But you can't script sincerity. And you definitely can't fake humility in front of a judge who's spent decades reading people like open books. And when Derek dropped "Sue me, I'm rich," the mask came off. That sentence wasn't just arrogant, it was honest. A flash of his real worldview, the belief that money is armor, that the law is something poor people navigate while rich people rearrange it to fit the furniture in their penthouse. But Judge Caprio, he didn't flinch. He didn't yell, didn't posture, he just adjusted. Because this case, it wasn't about one kid, one window, or one croissant. It was about a rot in the system, that quiet, suffocating idea that wealth equals immunity, that the more you have, the less you owe, and in that moment, Caprio said, "Not here, not today." So yeah, he picked up the phone in open court. He called Rhode Island Legal Services while everyone watched, jaws on the floor. And when Antonio Ricks, a man who hadn't taken a day off in years, who still wore his wedding ring under a dusting of flour, realized someone was actually standing up for him, he cried quietly just for a second. And the courtroom watched it happen. Let's talk about Antonio, because without him there is no story. He's not flashy, he doesn't.
If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment. Your feedback helps shape what we cover next, and you being here keeps the conversation going. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.
Chase cameras or quotes. He just wakes up at 4 a.m. and works. He built Bella's bakery with his late wife, every inch of it touched by their hands. The recipes, the wood tables, the chalkboard menus, all of it. And when Derek shattered that window, he didn't just damage property, he stepped on a memory, he made grief louder. You want to understand what was really at stake? It wasn't just flour and glass, it was legacy, stability, dignity. And yet, Antonio didn't seek vengeance. He wasn't out for headlines, he just wanted justice. A fair shot, a seat at the table, and thanks to Caprio he got one. That civil trial, it wasn't just about damages, it was about narrative. For the first time, someone like Antonio got to tell his story in full in court and in front of a jury who didn't see a poor man asking for pity, they saw a man demanding respect. And the jury delivered. $40,000. A message written in dollar signs that said, "We see you, we believe you, and we won't let arrogance go unchecked." But let's not forget, the real win wasn't the money, it was what Antonio did with it. Most people, after surviving something like that, might retreat, patch the window, raise the prices, close early, try to forget. Antonio did the opposite. He poured the damages back into the bakery, not just to rebuild, but to expand. He hired 2 more part-time workers, started delivering to local schools, and then, without fanfare, launched the Maria Rixai Culinary Scholarship, offering financial support to first-generation students pursuing culinary arts. Imagine that, taking the money that was meant to silence you and turning it into a megaphone for the next generation. But wait, it gets better. Because word of the case spread beyond the courtroom, it made news, sure. The headlines were spicy: millionaire's son vandalizes bakery, judge flips the script. Talk shows had a field day, but what really took off? The internet. Clips of Derek's courtroom moment were everywhere. The quote became merch. Someone even made a candle that smelled like pastry and regret. Bella's bakery started getting mail from all over the country, cards, letters, donations. A 6th grader from Illinois sent a drawing of Antonio as the pastry avenger. And all of that was from one moment, one decision, one judge who didn't just enforce the law but reimagined it. Of course there were critics. Legal scholars debated the ethics. Some said Caprio blurred boundaries, played fast and loose with court protocol. But here's the thing, those rules, they were never designed to protect people like Antonio. They were built to preserve the structure that lets people like Derek slide through untouched. Caprio didn't break the system, he exposed the cracks. And while the academics argued, regular people felt it. They saw themselves in Antonio. They remembered that job they lost to someone richer, that loan they never got approved for, that time they were told without words, "You don't matter here." But suddenly they did. Suddenly, justice looked like something more than paperwork and loopholes. It looked like a man in a robe saying, "We're going to make this right, even if I have to rewrite the playbook to do it." Now, we all love a good redemption arc. But don't worry, this isn't the part where Derek starts a nonprofit and runs for office. He didn't ride off into the sunset with a latte and a changed heart. But months later he came back, no cameras, no entourage, just him. He walked into Bella, holding an almond croissant in a plain brown bag, placed it on the counter, said, "This one's for you." Antonio looked at him, said, "This one's on the house." And just like that it ended. Not with vengeance, not with victory laps, but with something rarer, accountability. That's the kind of justice that lingers. It's not about punishing someone forever, it's about making them understand what they did. And maybe, just maybe, giving them a path forward that doesn't involve a golf club and a temper tantrum. Still thinking about that croissant, aren't you? Same. Because that croissant, that quiet almond-filled peace offering, wasn't just a pastry. It was a full-circle moment in a story that started with arrogance, spiraled into destruction, and somehow landed in something that actually felt human. Let's be real, in most stories like this there's no resolution. The rich kid walks, the small business folds, the news cycle spins once and tosses it into the trash. But this time it felt different. This time something actually stuck. Why? Because for once the script flipped. We watched a man like Antonio Rixai, someone who's probably never taken a sick day, get a chance, not because he screamed the loudest or lawyered up with a six-figure firm.
If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment. Your feedback helps shape what we cover next, and you being here keeps the conversation going. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.
But because a judge saw the injustice in front of him and said, "Nope, not happening." And that's rare, like finding a perfect avocado on the first try rare. Let's talk about that moment again, not the croissant, the moment. Derek Ashton sitting in that courtroom smirking like it's just another bump in his otherwise yacht-smooth life tells the judge, on record, "Sue me, I'm rich." It was the verbal equivalent of flicking a lit match into a pile of receipts. It was bold, stupid, and completely sincere. And in that one line he revealed everything about how he'd coasted through life up to that point. But here's the irony, that one sentence that flex meant to dismiss and disarm, it backfired so hard it launched a civil lawsuit mid-hearing. Caprio didn't even raise his voice. He didn't have to. He let Derek do the heavy lifting, exposing his own entitlement while Antonio just stood there, dignified, quiet, and heartbroken. A man who had every right to throw a punch but chose to show up instead. That's what made it so powerful, the contrast. Derek had wealth but Antonio had weight. He carried it in his voice, in his story, in the tiny details, the kind you don't get from a legal brief. The wedding ring still on his hand, the tremble when he talked about the bakery's grand opening. The way he kept looking at the courtroom floor, not out of shame, but out of sheer exhaustion from years of holding it all together. And Caprio saw that. He saw a man who didn't have a single person in his corner until that moment. What followed wasn't just unprecedented, it was revolutionary. A judge on record arranging for legal representation right there in the courtroom. Like what? When does that ever happen? When does the system reach into itself and actually lift someone up? The message was loud and clear: access to justice should not be based on your income bracket. That courtroom on that day became more than just a legal venue, it became a correction. And let's not forget, this wasn't about revenge. Antonio wasn't asking for millions. He didn't demand pain and suffering compensation or broadcast his victimhood. He just wanted to fix his bakery and make sure the man who tried to break it learned something. What he got instead, a symbolic win for everyone who's ever felt small in front of someone powerful. And Derek, he learned. Not in a way that came easy, not from a crisis PR firm or a damage control playbook, but in the way that actually matters, the long, quiet fallout of being publicly held accountable. The viral fame faded, sure, but the consequences stuck. He couldn't escape the shadow of his own quote. Every time someone Googled his name, that moment popped up. The courtroom, the vandalism, the smirk, the sentence. And eventually, the apology. It's easy to write that part off, to roll your eyes at the idea of redemption. But that scene, Derek walking into Bella's bakery unannounced with a single croissant and a two-word apology that wasn't scripted, that wasn't for show. It was real, small, yes, late, absolutely, but real. And in the world we live in, that kind of accountability, that kind of follow-through, even just showing up without a lawyer present, is rare, almost foreign. Antonio could have refused. He could have kicked Derek out, humiliated him, or simply said nothing. But instead, he offered him a moment of grace. Because forgiveness, that's a different kind of justice, one that doesn't erase consequences but adds something to the equation that courtrooms can't measure: healing. You see, this wasn't just a story about crime and punishment. It was about dignity, about choosing to stand when it would have been easier to stay small, about a bakery owner who became the quiet hero of a system that often forgets its own heart. And maybe, just maybe, it was about one rich kid learning that money doesn't make you invincible, that sometimes the smallest people have the biggest lessons to teach. If that hit you in the gut, or gave you a little hope that karma still knows how to use a GPS, hit that like button. Comment below with the last time you saw arrogance get perfectly put in its place. Share this with someone who needs to hear that money isn't a free pass. And subscribe, because next time, we're talking about a luxury wellness brand that promised spiritual enlightenment and ended up in spiritual bankruptcy. You won't want to miss it.